All right, well, we'll make a start. Welcome to the 527th meeting of Canterbury Regional Council. This meeting is not being live streamed, but will be recorded, and with the recording to be available on the Council's website. I'll invite Councillor Craig Paulin to give a mihi whakatau, and then that will be followed by Tumu Taiao, and Cranwell, who will open the meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Craig.
Whakaronga ki ki te tangi a te manu re runga rawa e. Tui a. Tui ai runga, tui ai raro. Tui ai roto, tui ai raho. Tui a te heringa tangata, ka runga ta ao, ka runga te pō, a ti hei mauri ora. A ka huri au taku whakaro ki nā tini aitua ko hei atu ki te pō. Haere, haere, haere. A ki te whānau, o te rāpaki o te raki whakaputa. Takato te taonga, o Crockett. Moi mai rā, oki mai. Apti hono o tātou hono, toka mati ki te hokamati. Apti hono o tātou hono, toka ora, a kānuhi ora, a tēnā koutou. A tēnā koutou I runga I tā hotanga o te rā. Te wā kāhuru o te tau, re tonu, te wā o matariki, o puanga hoki. Anau mai hara mai, I tēnei rā. Nā iwi o Waitaha, koutou e noho nei, koutou e mātaki nei, koutou e whakarongo nei, a tēnā koutou. A kona, tai mai nei te rā, he wā kōrero, te wā whakatau I tō tātou pai tāwhiti o te kaunihera Taiao ki Waitaha. Anā, kia kaha koutou. Ka maumahara ki nā kōrero o te hāpore o nā iwi o Waitaha. Whakarongo ki tō manua. Whakamana I tō tātou Taiao. Nā manu, nā ika, nā aua. Ai, he rā whakahirahira tēnei. E tika ana te kōrero I te wā nei, he waka ekeno. We're in this together. We're on this waka together. So I just want everyone to remember that. It's a big day. And so just a big mihi to everybody. Acknowledge everybody that's come from the community that may watch this later, that may listen later. And just acknowledge the work we've got ahead of us. And why are we doing it? Mō tātou, mō kauri, muri aki for us and our children after us, and our environment, of course. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou hoatu te raku, kia Tumu Taiao Cranwell, tēnā kia ora.
Tēnā koe, kai kaunihera Pauline, no tō mei, I tēnei ata, tautoko ngā mihi ko mihia, tautoko ngā kōrero hia I tēnei ata I whāriki hia ki runga I tēnei whāriki kei mui I a tātou katoa. Kia kaha kia mai ki manawa nui I a tātou katoa. Hei whakapapa te wai kei mui I a tātou o tēnei ekinga marunga te waka. Nō reira koutou, tātou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Minua tātou ko tēnei karakia, he karakia mo te waka. Mo te waka hei haere marunga I ngā moana, ngā ngaru, aha koa te nui ngā ngaru, ka eke te ehu o te waka ki mua. So just reiterating Councillor Pauling's kōrero just about being on a journey on the waka. I had another karakia in my mind, so I've changed. And it is about, this karakia, it's about working, moving forward. Doesn't matter how big the waves are, doesn't matter what the challenges are, you can travel together, move together as one. Nā reira, kia kaha koutou I tēnei rā. Nō reira me noi tātou. Pātura taku hai ki te riu o te waka e takato nei. Rai kura, rai ora, te Māori ka turu ka paua ki tā whiti hotaraki e. Rurukuti a te mata pupuni a tāne. Rurukuti a te ihu mata pupuni a tāne. Rurukuti a te kaimata pupuni a tāne. Rurukuti a te raua ua tapu a tāne. Rurukuti a te kowhau tapu a tāne. O te waka e takato nei. Au e tuturu whiti whakamaua kia tūna. Ye huia taiki e. Aio.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling, and thank you, Taiao and Cranwell. Just before I start, I'd like to say welcome to everybody in the room, reflecting what both Craig and Yayan have said around this is going to be a very substantial deliberation into our long-term plan. And what we're doing here, so that everybody in the room is clear, is to actually direct staff to formulate and put together the draft long-term plan, which is a budget of the council over the next 3 years, but it goes for 10 years. It's a 10-year plan. So that the final decision making around the long-term plan will be made on the 17th of June. And this allows time for staff to prepare the document, send it to the auditors, which is a requirement under the Local Government Act, and then will come back to us for the final deliberations. And as everybody knows, we've had public submissions, we've had the required submission process, and we've had lots of fabulous input from various members of the community from right across Canterbury. And now it's up to us to do our deliberations in the best interests of the community of the whole of Canterbury, and to talk about, to weigh up what the rates affordability will be, but more importantly, around what our actions are going to be around our main task under the Local Government Act, which is to work for a sustainable environment across Canterbury. Are our plans doable? What are the interests of everybody in the small towns, in the big cities, in the rural areas, and the people who work on the land? What are the interests of those? We should be weighing them up. And there's many household budgets that are stretched, we know that. And we have to weigh up the fact that we're still in COVID-19. And we have to talk about the economic certainty or uncertainty as we see it. And more importantly, we have to think about intergenerational changes and challenges that need to be made, looking forward to sustaining life on our planet and life particularly in Canterbury. So it's really good that we've had fantastic support from the staff, and that the councillors have already been doing diligent work around this, and we've all been out and been very proactive during the consultation period. So it's very exciting that we're here today, as democracy provides, to go into a full deliberation at this stage of the process. So just for noting that that's where we're up to. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to apologies. There are no apologies. And as I stand it, nobody has, there's no changes to the conflicts of interest, but as we go through, what will happen is that if particular issues come up, councillors will acknowledge any conflict of interest they believe they have, and will sit back from the table after letting the secretary know, so she knows what's happening. But is there anybody who wants to register a conflict of interest at this stage? All right, we'll carry on. So matters for council decision. We're now turning to the council. The agenda today is the staff recommendations. This document here. We're going to page 7 of this agenda. So on page 7, we have some recommendations, and they are generally about receiving the submissions for the long-term plan. So we have a summary of submissions here as well. And we have the submissions report that we'll be receiving. And I'll believe that Councillor Peter Scott will move those two resolutions. I'm looking for a seconded by Councillor Claire Mackay. I'll now put, did anybody have any questions? All right, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. I don't hear any no's, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask some staff to come to the table, I think. So we'll, who wants to come up? David and your team, Carolyn Hart. Jessie, are you coming up? And Cam, are you coming up? We'll be going through the report by portfolio, as the councillors know, and if you'd like to say a few words, or I'll hand it over to you now, David, just to see what you want to say, or do you want to say something now?
Tēnā tātou katoa, tēnā ngā mihi kia koutou i ngā kai kaunihira tai atu ki ngā memo te hapori, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora and thank you, Chair. We present the staff report with regard to the long-term plan, draft long-term plan. Just to give some overarching intro, of course, the consultation document contained an option 1, which was council's preferred option, and option 2. The report you have in front of you contains also now the staff advice on a final draft long-term plan. In that staff advice, we've sought to ensure that we recognise and provide for the council's statutory requirements. It acknowledges the council's transformational aspirations that it wishes to pursue. Staff have also balanced the risk and risk exposure with regard to our ability to deliver this plan and affordability of the plan for the community. Of course, it evaluates in the staff report the submissions that we've received from the community and takes those into account in the proposed amendments to the plan. And we'll seek your reflection on all of these during your deliberations. With regard to doability, we've specifically focused on 4 areas of key risk. 1, the ability for the organisation to scale up to deliver this transformational plan, including the ability to procure goods and services. The challenge with regard to the access to labour requirements, particularly in this post-COVID climate that we're currently in. Of course, also anticipating the change and uncertainty that currently exists within the local government sector with reforms from central government and the uncertainty that creates, as well as monitoring the disruptions that we may get from external factors, i.e. COVID-19, should that re-emerge for us. The plan has continued to, we've endeavoured to hold to the core principles underpinning how we deliver for the council, and that is designing deliverable programs that are fiscally responsible, taking advantage of external COVID funding opportunities, of which there is a substantial aspect of this plan does, ensuring we continue to build and strengthen the partnership with Ngāi Tahu, retain the collaborative engagement with our partners and stakeholders in the community, especially through the CWMS. We maintain transparency, provide for those transformational opportunities, and delivering on enduring priorities and statutory requirements as per your strategic direction. And of course, considering the needs of future generations as we respond to both legacy environmental issues and the challenges that come with a changing climate. So present the report to you and look forward to your deliberations today.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to all the staff for working on this document over such a long period of time. This is one of the biggest things that councillors do in terms of their 3-year term, and making this decision around the budget is absolutely top in our work. So thank you all, and I know it can be quite taxing. And now we've got to a great place, and it's a very good report. So yes, we do accept it, and I think you've got a recommendation that we receive it and on the options, and yes, we're very delighted to receive it. So that's great, and we've already resolved that. So now, David, I believe, and Louise, we're turning to page 22. Is that right? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, there was a staff recommendation at 5 on page 18.
Yeah, that's the one I was just glossing over then by saying that we'd already passed it when we accepted it. So that's right, isn't it, David? We've accepted it.
You've accepted the report. What recommendation 5 does is get a starting point for council with regard to where you want to start your deliberations from. So it's your sort of your reference point. So
I'll move that staff, that council. Oh, all right. I thought that that's what we start with the state of commission report, commission summary and staff notes. I haven't got my electronic thing on.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd already done that.
the second part of the second part of recommendation 5 is probably the most pertinent, and that is where council indicate their preferred option to go forward into your deliberations. So that's on page 18.
I don't think we need any debate around this. Thanks very much. We're moving on now. That this is moved by Megan Hands, that council receive submissions on options and rates affordability and indicate a preferred option before considering each deliberation topic.
I'd like to move that we consider the staff option as the option to begin our deliberations from.
Seconded by Councillor Farm.
Can we speak to them as well? I just thought in our process discussion that this was a starting point for general discussion about the options, as far as I was aware.
Well, look, I just might adjourn the meeting for a minute because I don't actually know what we're doing here. So I'm just going to stop for a minute and take some advice because that wasn't clear on the documents we had to start with. So what are we doing, Louise? Why are we doing that? And we're moving on, and what we're doing now is we've already accepted all of this. We're not having a general debate around the options now. What we're doing is we're going through all the portfolio areas. And we're starting into those on page 22. So yes, that's what we're doing. So are staff going to speak to water and land?
Caroline will give a summary of that. So we're on page 19 through to 22 of your report.
Tēnā koutou katoa. The water and land portfolio is a significant portfolio of work for Environment Canterbury. At the portfolio level, broadly, staff advice is outlined here as a recommendation based on option 1, the preferred option that was consulted on. There are some specific recommendations outlined in 6.1 through to 6.5 that I'd like to refer to you for as part of your deliberation. These are matters addressing some slight rephrasing of some budgets to correct some errors, indicating a cost-neutral transfer between portfolios, and there are some specific recommendations for you to consider around zone committee funding and the targeted rate for Hekio Hines Ma, which appears later in the document in pages 44 and 45. So starting from recommendation 6.1, it's a recommendation, and this is in relation to the Mackenzie alignment to Mokahi initiative, that there's a decrease in the general rate funding for the Runanga honorary area in year 1, with the honorary area budget returning to what is proposed in option 1 by year 2. The recommendation for this is that there's a slight rephasing of the expenditure here, recognising that the work that has been undertaken in the Mackenzie Alignment Initiative is still maturing, and that we anticipate there'll be a fewer number of meetings required in year 1 with Runanga, and so the budget is recommended to be adjusted accordingly. We anticipate that as the program matures into year 2, that there will be an increased frequency of engagement, and so therefore the recommendation is that the budget then returns to 16,000 per year.
Thank you, Carolyn. Is that all?
Continue through all of the recommendations or take one at a time?
Just give us an overview of the whole lot. Councillor Pauling, did you have a comment about?
I just have a question about whether we do need to do recommendation 5 first, because I think that sets a good scene about where we've got to some submissions. And I don't think it's going to be overly strenuous. I just think it's a good thing to do. But I'm just asking the question. But anyway, I'm happy to continue.
So you all just wanted to talk about it. Is that what we were doing? It's just that we didn't discuss that in the beginning. So we can't, if we want to talk about it, we can do that. Why don't we do that now? Why don't we, if you all want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. So I'll move a resolution except I'm not sure what these words here mean. So Catherine, if I want to have a resolution so they can debate option 1 and 2 and just talk about it, that's just to get a debate on the floor. Just use those words. All right, they'll remove that. Council receives submissions on options and rates affordability and indicate a preferred option before considering each deliberation on the topic. But you see, my concern about that is if you indicate a preferred option, what does that actually mean? We're just starting the debate. Okay, rates and affordability indicate and just open the debate around a preferred option or options, it should be, before considering each topic. Okay, well, I'll move that. Who's going to second that? Seconded by Councillor Pauling. All those in favour? Everybody in favour? Please say aye. Anybody opposed? Please say no. Okay, we're going to do that. So does this mean everybody wants to have a say now? Who would like to speak to it? Councillor.
I'm happy to. I just thought because Megan, sorry.
So I'm in the chair, you go first.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
That's all right.
What I'm most conscious of with this LTP is really the privilege of being in this seat around this table, charged with the task, like you have outlined, Chair, of making decisions for the benefit of the entire Canterbury Waitaha Rohi. And I really want to thank those submitters from across Canterbury who engaged with us, a whole entire spectrum from intergenerational farming operations concerned about affordability, to wholehearted support from the business community, to pensioners and young people urging us to do more and faster. And these voices are who ultimately will guide us today in our decision making. I'm acutely aware that in this year, 2021, we are in a climate and ecological emergency. And I really do wish that reference to that fact was, as it was referred to by some submitters, based on emotion rather than science. But unfortunately, the scientific evidence shows it's our quite stark reality. So I'm particularly conscious of the fact that we here today are the generation of leaders who have the opportunity to take action on giving our kids and grandkids a shot, not even a guarantee, that's out the window, but a shot at a relatively stable climate. Our parents didn't have the weight of scientific evidence or the tools, and for our grandkids and kids, the change will be too late. So it's up to us at decision-making tables just like this around Aotearoa and around the world in this short window of a few years. As many submitters pointed out, the longer we put off substantial changes, the more expensive change becomes. There is no easy or cheap option, and the option of doing nothing will be far more expensive and traumatic for everyone. Substantial changes that are proposed here today and that may change within today are not nice to have gold-plated projects. They're the bare minimum of action necessary to respond to our climate and ecological emergency. In saying that, I'm really aware that there are no overnight fixes in all of the huge challenges we face. And a lot of what we're proposing today takes time. But there are some things, decisions that we can make today and finalise in June that can have immediate impact from year one. And that is what I'm particularly focused on today. And with that, Chair, I'm happy to second the staff advice based on option one as a starting point for our deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hands, do you want to speak?
Just briefly wanted to acknowledge the staff that have worked on this LTP. It's been pretty tough. We went out with a consultation option that it was quite clear the community had some opinions about when we received the number of submissions that we have, and so I think it's important that we thank the submitters for that. Councillor Pauling and I were talking earlier about the weight of decision that we are making to, we're moving forward with today. We are looking at a budget, even with the staff option, of an additional $44 million plus or minus of expenditure. We did have significant feedback from our community about affordability. If I think over the submissions, that was the thing that shone through the most. We had lots of submitters that said, great to see you being bold, go and do it. 24% is the cost. We also had lots of people who said, actually, we don't necessarily agree with your ambition, disagree or agree with your ambition, but hang on a minute, mate, it's pretty tough out here. That split was very obvious for me between our rural and urban community. And I feel strongly the weight of being a councillor for all of Canterbury, not just from the ward that I represent. And so I want to acknowledge that for me, whatever option we pursue and every piece of expenditure that we look at, who pays is at the forefront of my mind. It is not about whether things have merit or do not have merit in every single case. It's simply about who can afford to pay and whether that split is fair. When we heard out of Ashburton, Huranui, Waimakariri and Waimate that the options we put forward, both option 1 and 2, were not affordable for either households or communities more often than not. Yet in Christchurch, most people thought option 1 was fairly affordable and was affordable for the community. With some who didn't think it was. It was actually quite a close split, but the blue bar, if you look on that page, is significantly higher than anywhere else across the other districts. And Selwyn and Timaru had indications where the community was clearly split quite 50-50, and there were different elements that influenced that. And so I just wanted to state at the outset, I'm really happy with where the staff option has got to. I am encouraged by going back through the programs and looking at the rephasing and looking at, you know, saving millions, quite literally millions of dollars, but still delivering something that looks a bit like what the council was trying to achieve in terms of ambition. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that actually the staff option goes pretty close to what we went out with in option 2, but is slightly more affordable in terms of the headline rate, and then it will just be about how we seek to balance that at the end of the day. I'm really encouraged by where we've got to, and I hope that everybody can take heed of that as we move through the conversation, because I think it is a positive thing. As I said before, it's been tough to get to here, and we'll no doubt have some strong debate today, but I think we're starting from a good place, and I hope that we can knock it down a little bit more in some places and maybe increase it somewhere else. You know, we'll see what happens, but thanks, Chair.
Just like to remind councillors that we do actually have a public meeting around this on the 17th of June where we're making the final decisions, just so you all know, and there's a limit around how much time you can speak here. So Nicole Marshall, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Like both councillors Farm and Hands, I want to tōtoko everyone. I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to submit on this long-term plan. You know, almost 1,300 submitters. That's more than we've ever had, and that's just a huge effort from everyone in the community to be that involved. Equally and potentially even more so, the staff have been involved. We've been working on this for a year now. Significant work went into developing both options 1 and 2, and to turn around and come back with the staff advice option that delivers much of option 1 but for cheaper than option 2. I think that's just a huge effort in a very short time frame. I just want to say how wholeheartedly I thank you for really addressing those affordability concerns that were raised, and the example properties you have provided to us showing the significant reductions, especially in those urban areas that Councillor Hands mentioned, that would make it much more affordable for those who highlighted their struggles. So thank you, and I'm like Councillor Hands, I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Are there any other speakers? All right, thank you very much, everybody. I guess I'm putting that resolution. All those, or have we already went? Yes.
The recommendation is to indicate a preferred option.
No, I know. Oh, look, we're not doing. Okay, thank you very much for that advice.
So I just want to clarify what we're voting on.
Oh, that's why I said that we didn't want to do it. We're voting on accepting. We're voting on accepting the report. Speaking around the resolution on the first page.
Sorry.
I Farm moved.
Thank you, Nicole Marshall. I'm the chairperson. So we're moving that resolution that's on there, and they haven't indicated an option, but they don't need to. That's the ruling I'm making. Okay. Did you? Did you? Okay. Same option.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I just need to get this clarified.
All right, we're back on the journey. So what we're changing the words to, so that the council secretary's very valid advice is accepted, and she's right. The council receives submissions on options and rates affordability, and adopt option 1 as presented as presented in the report as the preferred option before today's consideration of each deliberation. That's what we're voting on. Yes, it is. It's the staff's report that we're adopting today, but we're making it explicit that it's called option 1, and that's what I'm advised that it says in the report.
We're receiving. We're not adopting. Sorry, we're receiving.
We're receiving it. actually, I'm the chairperson and I'm taking advice from the staff, and that's what we're doing, what I just read out. So that will be, we've got legal advice that we have to adopt option 1 as presented by the staff today as the preferred option to start the debate. Okay, and that's what it's going to be. So I'm moving, I've already moved that and done all that, so I'm putting that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? They're not. No. For what? That's all right. That's all right. No.
If I can move an amendment, I think the confusion is around the use of the words option 1.
Look, excuse me, I'm ruling this out of order. We're taking legal advice from the legal counsel, and she has advised that we must put that in there. So we have to accept those words. And this is not about an argument around this. It's about accepting staff advice to go forward. The adjournment's finished. It's not for conversation with journalists in the back of the room now. We've got back in the meeting. Thank you very much. I've taken more legal advice, and what it actually should say is that the council receives submissions on options and rates affordability and adopts staff advice based on option 1 on page 18, and this whole paragraph that they've got there is what we're going to adopt as option 1 as presented in today's deliberation. Before considering each deliberation, that is what we actually need to adopt. And that is what I thought we were adopting when we did the option 1. But there's been a misunderstanding here. So we've now got it sorted. That's what we're moving. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? No, thank goodness. We're moving on. All right, we're moving on, and oh, that's your agenda. Okay, now we're on page 22. 22, Caroline, you'd finished all your advice for all of that staff section, hadn't you? Or were you just halfway through when a councillor interrupted?
We had just begun, and on 6.1, I'm happy to move through the other recommendations. Thank you. Recommendation 6.2 is also in relation to the Mackenzie Alignment or Te Mokeke initiative. This recommendation is to correct an error that we have in the proposed long-term plan for the inclusion of a project manager from year 1 onwards. The need for the resource here to support the program manager as a project coordinator, and this is a capacity that we have in-house and is able to be sourced through our business support team. So we don't need to provide for a project manager as outlined in the draft long-term plan for this particular initiative. So the recommendation is that this provision is removed. In terms of moving now to 6.3, this is regarding the targeted rate funding for Hekio Hines managed aquifer recharge. This is an amendment that has been recommended to you to again respond to an error that had occurred in the budgeting in relation to CapEx as it appeared in the consultation document for the Hekio Hines Mara initiative. Just to provide a little more detail, there was supposed to be $600,000 for CapEx set aside in year 1, moving to 1.2 million in year 2. The coding error meant that the year 2 figures were entered into year 1. And so we had a cascading error, which the recommendation that we've got before you for your consideration today seeks to address. We have made considerable efforts to communicate this error to those members of the community who have a particular interest in this targeted rate, and note the intention to rectify this. Moving through then to recommendation 6.4. This is a recommendation for an internal transfer, a cost neutral transfer of the water data program from the regional and strategic leadership program to the water and land portfolio. So the regional strategic leadership portfolio, my apologies, to water and land portfolio. The water data program has been a significant initiative of this organisation, very innovative and sort of developmental program when it was initiated a few years ago. It has now become part of our core business and is more appropriately managed in the water and land portfolio. So the recommendation is that it is transferred through in a cost neutral basis to the water and land portfolio. There will be a corresponding recommendation for you in relation to the regional and strategic leadership portfolio when we come to that item. And then 6.5, we'll spend a little more time perhaps I think on this item, and this is recommending an increase in funding available for zone committees to support them in implementing their action plans. The option one, the preferred option that was consulted on with communities, provided $50,000 per committee per year to support them in the implementation of their action plans. You'll recall that zone committees have recently had a review of their terms of reference to support them in moving to an increased focus on action on the ground and to use action plans to help them focus their work in working with communities in this space. There have been a number of submissions that have sought an increase in funding to the zone committee specifically, or more generally looking to have investment made in some of the non-statutory actions that support some of the freshwater outcomes that we're seeking. We had sought advice from the zone committee chairs and deputy chairs on this item in a workshop. Their advice is provided for you in your report, but in brief, they would be receptive, I think, or would support having more than $50,000 per year made available to the zone committees for the work that they're doing on their action plans. It's important to recognise that the zone committees have only very recently had their terms of reference confirmed, and the year one of the long-term plan will be their first year of operating under the new terms of reference and implementing the action plans, which is a new mechanism for the committees. We therefore recommend that there's a phased approach in terms of a lift in funding for zone committees, and this is responding to doability considerations for the committees themselves and affordability considerations for the overall implications for our ratepayers. And that as the zone committees mature into their new terms of reference and the action plans, recommend that the year one funding remain as outlined, $50,000 per year per committee, but there'll be an increase in years 2 and then year 3 of $250,000 as a total, which would lift each zone committee's the funding that would be available to each zone committee to $75,000 per zone committee per year in year 2 and $100,000 per zone committee per year in year 3 ongoing. If you would like, Council, I can also speak to the item around that's on page 44 and 45 of your papers around the targeted rate for Hikio Hines Ma, which is also part of the water and land portfolio.
Well, just a minute. We'll do that as we go through the recommendations, I think. I'm just considering that at the moment. So is that all of them? You've spoken to them all now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Excuse me, 6.1 and 6.2 together first, and then we'll consider moving 6.3. I'm going to move an amendment to move that to 13.
Thank you, Jenny. If it's okay, could we please take 6.1 and 6.2 separately?
Oh, yes, that's fine. All right, we'll move 6.1 and first. So I'll call for a mover. Oh, well, wait a minute. We'll start out with council direct staff to include the projects and funding for the programs in this portfolio as per option 1, with the exception of the following. And this is 6.1, decrease 6,000 general rate funding for Runaka honoraria in year 1, with Runaka honoraria provisions returning to option 1 levels in year 2. That's 16,000. So Councillor Farnes moving that resolution.
I'm actually proposing to delete 6.1.
Yes, well, that you'll have to move it. Oh, you're going to want it Okay, so I'll move it. Move that as an amendment. I'm moving as the chair that. Who would like to second it? Seconded by Councillor John Sunkel. Now, are there any issues anybody wants to raise about that? Yes, Councillor Farm.
Thank you, Chair. I propose to delete staff recommendation 6.1. Look, I really appreciate staff scrutinising.
Hold on, we'll get that. That's it. We'll get that seconded. So that's she's moving to amend the resolution.
My advice is an amendment is a change. That's a direct negative. That's the opposite. What you do is you vote against it.
Yeah, and then you move it up.
Yeah.
Okay, you move it up.
Because if you're
Yeah, okay, we get it. All right, so we'll move with, this is moved, so it's moved and seconded by John. So when does she do that?
when we vote.
Right. Well, how can she though? Because,
Well,
yeah. Yeah, okay, let's do it.
The recommendation is to do.
Yeah, everybody votes.
Yes.
Right, so the situation is, no, they don't all do it. Who would like to speak to this? Okay, you speak to it now, Lam. You just speak, you want to delete it, you speak to deleting it.
Thank you. I'm
supporting it or not supporting it. You want to delete it.
I wish to delete it. Thank you, Chair. Look, I really appreciate staff looking into every dollar and scrutinising every dollar. And saying that with this item for Runanga honoraria in terms of Runanga engagement, I think it's and it's 6K. I feel like it's just inconsequential. It's sending the wrong message, and I just think we should retain option 1.
Okay. Who else would like to speak to it? Councillor, are you speaking to it or against? What do you want to do?
Yeah, so everyone's speak to it.
Yeah, to it. Yeah.
I actually support taking the staff advice there for the reasons that we've been given. It's basically around phasing of staff requirements and less requirements for meetings. So with that justification, I will support the recommendation as in 6.1.
Right. Who else would like to speak? Peter, can please indicate whether you're moving what you.
Look, I'm supporting 6.1. I think that is staff advice. As staff advice takes us to the point that there will be a surplus in this line item. So I support staff advice.
Who else would like to speak? Jan Cranmore.
Kia ora tātou. When we around this table, we're talking about partnership and supporting and Runanga and really supporting what they bring to the table. I know it could be prorated, but if there is a if you leave the 6,000 in there and it's not used, then it'll just carry over. But just in a sense, showing that I mean, as Councillor Farm said, it's only 6,000, and it also kind of sends a message that if you take it out, it's kind of really sending a message that we don't really support engaging, having true good engagement and actually honouring people's time and effort. Kia ora.
All right. Are there any other speakers? So if you don't want this, you have to vote against it. Okay, I'll put that to the vote. 6.1. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Okay, we'll need to show counter. I think it's lost. I declare it lost. Is that right? Show of hands. Show of hands, all those for the resolution.
Sorry. That part.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So 5.
Sorry, councillors.
Your hands up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All those against, please put your hand up.
It's lost.
It's lost. All right, that I declare that lost. So that means that's deleted. It's lost. So do we? Okay. All right. Number 2. The 2 is decrease the provision for general rating of 115,000 for project managers in year 1. Who would like to move that? Moved by Councillor John Sunkel, seconded by Councillor Phil Clearwater. Is anybody wanting to speak to it or against it? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? Nobody opposed, that's carried. 6.3, we can either deal with that now or we can move that to deal with recommendation 13 around MAR on page 45. I think it's probably best if we move it.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm the ECAM councillor who sits on the Heinz Hekio Anzac for Recharge Trust. This is correcting an error, and I think it should be moved now as a separate item. And I would prepare to move that.
All right. Ian, you're moving that we take item 6.3 in conjunction with, it now becomes 13.1, and we.
And we should move it as a separate item as 6.3 because it's correcting an error, and so we should move it. Yeah.
So is that all right? But staff's advice is to do those, take it with those other 2 that you just said, Caroline. So what are those other 2?
So the balance of recommendations for you as part of the water and land portfolio 6.1 through to 6.5. We then have some further recommendations regarding targeted rate, among other targeted rates later in the paper. You may wish to consider the Hekio Heinz targeted rate sooner if you'd like to consider all your water related matters together, but I would recommend that 6.3 be moved or considered as part of this pack around the water and land portfolio.
Right. Is that all right with you, Ian?
I'm not sure I quite understood the advice, but my view is that because we're correcting an error, we should do it now.
Right, let's do it now. We'll do it now. So moved up by Council Kinsey, 6.3, decrease targeted on. Well, I need someone to push my button for me today. That'd be great. In many different meanings. Don't report that. 6.3. All right. Have a second. Seconded by Councillor Peter Scott. All those in favour, please say aye. I laugh at my own joke because I'm going hysterical. And don't report that either. So all those in favour, you all said aye. Anybody opposed? No. Okay, that's carried. Good. We're going on to 6.4. I'll ask for a mover for 6.4. Who's going to move 6.4? Good. John's moving. Who's seconded by who? Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. Is there any debate? Yes. Would you like to speak, Councillor?
I have a question about this portfolio, and this is probably the best place to raise it. And just because water quality was such probably the second biggest thing behind affordability in our submissions, levels of service 11 achieve improvements in freshwater outcomes through implementation and delivery of work programs. I'm just seeking assurance from staff that the actions proposed in this long-term plan will deliver on achieving improvements in freshwater outcomes consistent with the ask through our submissions.
But I'd like to ask staff to give us that. Can they provide that assurance, please?
Thank you, thank you, Councillor. We have a oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. So in regard to 11.2, yes, we do have detailed programs in place to deliver on the shared work programs that we have established. Many of these programs are well established and underway now. Examples include some of the whakaora te waihora work, whakaraupo work, Mackenzie alignment initiatives, among others. So we are committed to this work program and the achievement, the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve through them.
Thank you for that advice. Anybody else wish to speak or ask a question? Councillor Southworth.
I'd just like to ask for assurance that there is funding for an uplift in activity in the urban rivers.
Yes, there is. We have a dedicated program for urban rivers work. We have a lot of work underway in that program already. The major effort is around the stormwater consents and the monitoring of the stormwater consents that exists across the region. We do also have some work underway to prepare for the initiatives that we have under the Three Waters Reform, and that includes looking at the initiatives we need to continue our work in drinking water source protection, awareness and monitoring, and also look at the work that we have in relation to managing wastewater and stormwater initiatives.
Thank you, Caroline. Anybody else wishing to speak or ask a question? All right, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody against? There being nobody against, I'll declare that carried. We're up to point 6.5. Who's going to move that one up? Claire. Moved up by Claire Mackay, seconded by Nicole Marshall. Would you like to speak to it, Claire?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just also like to thank staff for finding a way to increase the general rate funding of the CWMS Community Engagement Fund. I think that's really, really important to acknowledge, as you outlined, Caroline, the recent review around zone committees and their terms of reference, and the development of action plans, which are basically going to be working in the non-statutory space with the community, and that can be in many different guises to increase water quality and get improvements in the environment in the wider space as well. So look, I just really want to convey my appreciation, I think, on behalf of all the zone committees and as part of the CWMS, which is very close to my heart, to see that we're actually able to fund this, and just appreciate the work that you've done in getting us to the space we are now. And thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak or ask a question? All right, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There being none, that's carried. Is there anything else that people would like to consider on the land and water area? Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just with respect to some submitters in their submissions, with regard to the level of service number 9, specifically 9.3, we had several submitters, Ashburton and Lyndhurst, and I believe it was MHP, just requesting that everybody was treated the same with respect to meeting the requirements of GMP. We are quite focused on ensuring under 9.3 that there seems to be a real focus around ensuring that aggregated consent expertise or collectors for irrigation companies meet the minimum, but we do have a lot of other resource consent holders that have requirements for farm environment plans. But not only that, we do have some requirements in our land and water regional plan that actually all farmers are farming at GMP. And I just have some sympathy for the submitters, and I have looked at staff replies in the submission to the submitters, and I'm just wondering whether there could actually be a relook at that, or whether you could provide me with some advice on your thinking around that.
Thank you, Councillor. So with regard to the level of service 9.3, performance measure as it's articulated in the draft long plan is to ensure aggregated consent entities are managed at a minimum to GMP. You may, as a council, want to consider an amendment to this level of service performance measure, so it's articulated as to ensure aggregated consent entities are managed to meet GMP.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding of the Ashburton, Lyndhurst and Mayfield Homes Valletta concerns in their submission was that they are on a trajectory of significant nitrate losses for their members in managing good management practice. So their concerns weren't that other farmers were required just to meet, they weren't concerned that other independent farmers outside their irrigation schemes weren't meeting good management practice. Their concerns were that in meeting good management practice, that those farmers weren't necessarily required to reduce their nitrate losses at the same speed as the irrigation schemes. And the irrigation schemes were concerned because their land use consents are dependent on the overall health of the catchment, that they might reduce nitrates in line with the plan. And in the case of Mayfield Homes Valletta, it's plan change 2. But unless the other independent farmers outside the scheme were required under the Farm Environmental Plan process to reduce at the same pace at which MHV shareholders have to reduce, they thought that that might be unfair on the irrigation schemes in terms of meeting their catchment water quality water targets, but also that their members would be reducing where other people would be meeting GMP but not necessarily reducing nitrate losses. That's my understanding of the concern, and I'm not sure Councillor Mackay's question perhaps quite addressed the right issue.
All right, Councillor Scott. Staff, would you like to make a response?
Just a very brief response, and that the obligations of farmers and schemes are managed in line with their consent conditions rather than an expression of a level of service in a long-term plan, if that helps the discussion.
I think the word minimum and performance measures is a motive around this. I think there's a wider understanding coming our way in terms of the Mayfield Valletta Hines submission that they made in terms of things that we need to deal with. The aggregation of these consent certainly does help us in terms of the way we manage going forward, because we've got one point of contact and we need more of these systems in place. But I guess what they're saying is that they're trying to do everything and moving in the right direction. But I need to support Ian also in saying that if you look at natural direction, it's about catchment load. And so there's a bit of a counterintuitive thing going on here.
So have we got assurance from what staff's advice around this level of service? How are we going to deal with this?
So a recommendation is that we amend the performance measure of 9.3 to be reworded to say, ensure aggregate consent entities are managed to meet GMP.
Are you going to do that, and when you'll work with the auditors?
Yeah. So the recommendation would be to do it now as part of your water and land portfolio.
Madam Chair, could I propose that we move that this item of business being discussed be referred to the relevant committee for further review?
Let's see what staff have got up there. Thank you, staff. The answer is no, I understand. For staff, have you got the words up there? Because it needs to go on. I know, but that's what I thought about all of them. Well, what are we doing with the ones Nicole raised? This one's not one yet. Okay, so this is not a minor change. This is a major change. So the CE hasn't got delegation to do this. So we do need a resolution around this one. So what are you getting up there? Have you got it up there? Because I can't see that. Neither can anyone else. You need to make it big. Okay, that's good. So that's what we're voting on. So does staff want to speak to this again, or you got it right? You've spoken enough. Is that all right, Caroline? Okay. Yes, you can ask a question.
Just a question of clarity. With the change to this, it doesn't in any way conflict with if the consent requirements are for more than GMP. There's not a conflict between what the consent and the level of service is saying.
I think the clarity is this isn't about an accountability for the money that is spent, counts the money of ratepayers that's spent to support GMP. It's not the directive which is in your land and water plan and in subsequent consents. That is a separate matter.
Councillor Claire Mackay.
Thank you. Look, I've just pulled up that relevant consent, and I'm sure that Councillor Mackenzie's and Councillor Scott's views probably are the sentiments of them as well. But the submission reads, it's around, and I was trying to convey this, it's around the distinction of the difference of treatment between aggregated consents and individuals. So it reads, they question why there is a distinction between aggregated consent entities and individual consent holders with regard to the implementation of good management practice. Under the performance measures of level service 9, ECAN is to provide advice and resources, and that's 9.1, to enable the implementation of GMP, while aggregated consent holders are to be managed to meet the GMP at a minimum. And it says the GMP standards required of farmers should be consistent and not determined based on the type of consent they fall under. So I think if we can take out minimum, that would provide some resolution.
Councillor Mackay, I just asked you to clarify that you're not looking at a consent, you're looking.
Sorry, yes, I'm looking at submission 1142. Sorry.
Right, that's okay.
Apologies.
No, okay, so you're the mover. Do you want to say?
I'm happy to move that change and just make sure that people are awareness of basically treating everybody equally. So, thank you.
Have a second for that? No, who would like to second that? Councillor Scott? Councillor Scott, do you want to second that, or Councillor Mackenzie? Come on, one of you. Yeah. Councillor Scott, second it. Right, now we've got the words clear. Councillor Mackenzie, do you want to speak to it?
I have a question. So does this mean that Environment Canterbury cannot impose a level higher than GMP on an aggregated consented entity?
We're asking staff for the answer, please.
No, it does not. The provisions that are in place to guide how standards are set for land use and activities conducted on that land is through our resource management plans and the consents that flow from them. The level of service that you're looking at here in the long-term plan is in relation to performance standards that you're seeking to have achieved in relation to the budget investment that has been made.
Right, are there any further questions? Does anybody else want to speak to this? Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There being nobody opposed, that's carried. Anything else anybody wants to raise on the land and water section? Because this is the chance. All right, we're moving on. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going on to page 23 of the agenda. This is the portfolio, biodiversity and biosecurity. Who's speaking to that, David? Oh, Cam, you're welcome to speak. Over to you.
Tēnā koutou. So biodiversity and biosecurity represents a significant body of work for council and how we work to deliver biodiversity and biosecurity outcomes with our community. So I'll run through staff advice, which includes some changes to programs from both an affordability and feasibility perspective. Staff propose with regard to 7.1 to decrease UAGC funding of 150,000 for parks maintenance from year 1 to year 2 within the Braided River Revival program. This is for affordability concerns to shift some of that funding from year 1 to year 2. With regard to 7.2 and 7.4. This concerns relocation of $300,000 of year 1, 2 and 3 general rate funding from the Priority Habitat Wetland Protection Program to the Leading and Partnering for Biodiversity Outcomes Program. So both 7.2 and 7.4 speak to that. And so that's a shift of funding within the portfolio. With regard to 7.3 and Miuru Rako, Miuru Rako focuses on engaging and enabling landowners and community groups to undertake habitat protection and regeneration. Staff proposed to decrease year 1 general rate funding for Miuru Rako by 600,000, decrease year 2 by 1 million, and decrease year 3 by 1.4 million. Staff note general support for the program, but also concerns regarding doability and affordability. This recommendation enables a start to the program at a scale that is deliverable and will provide confidence to ratepayers that the outcomes are achievable. With regard to 7.4, I addressed that as part of 7.2. That's the linkage there. And with regard to 7.5, staff proposed to maintain total funding for the Regional Pest Management Program while reducing $300,000 of general and targeted rates funding by the utilisation of reserves.
Thanks, Cam. That's great. Now, what we're going to do is take each one of these separately. So we'll move through. I'll just read out so it goes on the record. Council direct staff to include the projects and funding in for the programs in this portfolio as option 1 of the long-term plan, with the exception of the following, with the exception of 7.1. Decrease year 1 UAGC funding for Braided River Revival by 150,000 K and increase year 2 funding by 150,000. Who wants to move that? Moved by Councillor.
No, I don't want to move. I want to make comments before we do that. I'm happy with the way you're going to approach this.
You can, I don't mind. You can.
Look, I think we had a considerable day yesterday to get ourselves to the position that we're happy with. And to me, it seems that now we've got an opportunity where we had our increase to an area which we were comfortable with. And I see a big opportunity before us for people to add things back in. And I'm not all that happy about that. I will see how that goes, but I just think that's my warning.
Right, well, you're the only one allowed to make one of those comments. So thank you very much as the Deputy Chair. That's good. I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder now of 7.1. Moved by Councillor Mackenzie. Who else would like to? Seconded by Councillor Claire Mackay.
Sorry.
Pardon?
Sorry. Ian.
Ian Mackenzie. Ian Mackenzie, sorry, and Claire Mackay. Are there any questions around this one for clarification? Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. Well, just a minute. We're going to deal with that in a minute, aren't we? Yeah, we're coming to it. Yeah. So just take notice of what's on your paper at the moment, I think. So this is just that don't look at the screen at the moment. So anybody, any debate around this one? All right, I'll put that resolution 7.1. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? That's carried. We're up to 7.2. I'm looking for a mover for 7.2. Are you moving that, Councillor?
Can I propose, given that it's linked to 7.4, that we move the two together, because that was taking one from one and putting it back into the other.
Well, for my system up here, I'm going to move it separate. So 7.2 is moved separate. Who's going to move it? Moved by Councillor Pauling, seconded by Councillor Ian Mackenzie. Are there any questions around that one? Any debate? All right, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There being nobody opposed, that's carried. We're up to 7.3 now, and I understand there is going to be an amendment to this one. Just a minute.
Okay. Process. The one of the agenda gets moved and seconded.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do this like this. We're going to move this resolution. Yes, moved by councillor John Sunkel and seconded by, who would like to second it, by councillor Peter Scott, that we decrease year one general rate funding for Miraku by 60,000 and decrease year two funding by 1 million and year three funding by 1.4 million. Yes, councillor Farn.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment to this. And perhaps, is that going to go on screen? Yes. Maybe while it comes up on screen, could I just give some context for that? Thank you. So in our long-term plan, we really clearly set out what success looks like for biodiversity in Canterbury. And two of the key areas was promoting and supporting landscape scale biodiversity and biosecurity partnerships, and protecting and regenerating priority habitats, and investing in creating corridors and linkages to connect them. And these are precisely the aims of Me Ururako, which received, as we've heard from staff, really positive support across Canterbury Waitaha. However, staff in the paper and in the recommendations today have reflected some submitters' really valid concerns regarding doability and affordability, and the need to start the program at a scale that is really deliverable, and to be able to provide confidence to ratepayers that the outcomes are achievable. We also consistently hear, not only through our submissions from the LTP, but outside of that, to invest in our community groups and fantastic landowners who are already out there doing the work. ECAN does not always have to be the doer in these projects. In fact, we often get best value for money from ratepayer dollars by funding others. We're really lucky here in Canterbury to have two particularly exceptional groups with long-standing funding relationships with ECAN and fantastic relationships with their communities, QE2 and Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust. And we heard in both their submissions the significant leverage, security for ECAN investments, and positive conservation outcomes that result from our existing relationships with both Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust and QE2. Both organisations have a clear track record in achieving these conservation outcomes on private land, and protection in perpetuity ensures outcomes for biodiversity really are long-term. For example, with QE2 covenants, they're monitored every 2 years, and reps give ongoing support and advice to landowners. So this amendment, should I send through the amendment? Okay, this amendment therefore, which will soon come up, is intended to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, in meeting both the objectives of Me Ururako, but also being able to deliver clear biodiversity outcomes in year one, and in responding to requests in the submissions to aid in meeting unprecedented demand from landowners to protect Indigenous habitat on private land through perpetual legal protection via covenants. This is biodiversity gains that are just sitting out there. For ECAN, spending money to support these types of covenants on private land is a safe and secure investment that has enduring outcomes for biodiversity, and it's in line with our strategic direction, aims for landscape protection, which are clearly emphasised in our long-term plan. Many councillors will also be aware that QE2's priority for conservation and Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust is retaining and protecting existing biodiversity. And equally, Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust goals outlined in their submission all relate to the protection of old growth forest, rare ecosystems, and the establishment and protection of large areas of Indigenous forest. We all know investment into protection of existing biodiversity is considerably more cost effective for ECAN than revegetation and restoration projects. QE2, for example, in their submission calculated that it's significantly cheaper to fence and carry out weed and pest control for areas of naturally occurring vegetation than to undertake planting and wetland reconstruction projects. So the funding split I'm suggesting here comes from the fact the 400 for QE2 is the fact that they operate across the region. They have areas that they know of already, particularly in North Canterbury and South Canterbury, with rare limestone ecosystems that they flag in their submission. And Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust is there because we know that really high biodiversity values exist on Banks Peninsula, and we heard from a multitude of groups about the opportunity there.
Thank you, Councillor Farn. No, we've now got it up online. This is an amendment to 7.3, and this is what it is. So just have a look up on the screen now. If you can get it all on one screen, that'd be helpful. Just it's an amendment to 7.3. You can say you.
So what the first part, the 7.3, is to retain Miurirako funding as per option 1, and this is across years 1 to 10. This is what we went out and consulted on and got really good feedback on across the years. But in order to address the year 1 deliverability aspect, we're proposing that the program development and funding is carried out in line with staff recommendations. That's the 400k, but the 600k that we'd already consulted on as part of option 1 is allocated to QE2 400k and Banks Peninsula Trust 200k. And I've got the text there about it being used to protect high value landscape scale biodiversity projects. I do just finally want to address the question of why wouldn't we just put this funding, the 600k, into a contestable fund or have another process to decide this funding. And obviously that is council's prerogative to do that. I think what I'm asking is there's urgency in that space. We know that biodiversity, we're consistently losing it. This is about delivering in year 1 with existing projects. To me, it's a no-brainer, and it's up for your deliberations.
Thank you, Councillor Farn. So I've taken that as you're moving that while we've been speaking to it. We've now got it on the screen. I'm looking for a seconder for that. Who wants to second that?
Sorry, Chair, I did just want to add in if we could move the first option, the 7.3, and then 7.31 separately.
So you want to keep 7.3 as it is?
No, no.
I guess it is something.
All right. Well, I've already. Amendment now. This is the correct process. I've moved up 7.3. I've got a mover and a seconder, and now we are amending it. You've moved that you're going to amend it.
So I haven't got a second.
Who's seconding Lan's one? Well, it'll fail for lack of a seconder. Does everybody understand that? That's totally all right. If it fails for lack of seconder, it doesn't get up. I'm just telling everybody the process. Is there a seconder? Councillor Southworth is seconding it. All right, so are there any, I think what I'm doing next is I'm going to ask for staff advice around what that looks like to you from your advice. Can you provide advice around that?
Thank you, Chair. From regarding staff advice on this, QE2 Trust and Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust obviously do great work. They've got a track record of delivering on outcomes. Because one of the concerns with regard to Miurirako was from a doability perspective. This avoids those concerns because it's putting work outside of this organisation essentially. From an affordability perspective, those issues still remain, and it's for a council decision to make.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie's first.
Question, yeah. So just to be clear, we first have to vote for or against on the original option 7.3 in order to, well, because
we're running this meeting, so I've taken advice from the council secretary.
So for those of us who support not decreasing it, but don't want to actually specify QE2 or Banks Peninsula. Right.
Yes, I'd like
Just to, sorry, councillors, just to explain the rather convoluted amendment process. The original motion recommendation is on the table to be discussed. Councillor Farn has put forward an amendment which we voted on because we've got a seconder. Other councillors are also free to put up amendments to, and we can go through that So Councillor Mackenzie, if you wanted to put a,
No, she doesn't.
that's the way you would do it. You deal one amendment at a time.
Adjourning this meeting for a minute at 11:06. Right, we're adjourning back to the table quickly because everyone's getting hungry. So what's happened here is it's partly the process that we're using. We have moved. We've moved 7.3. It's on the paper. The first amendment to that is going to be retain Miu Raku funding as option 1. So that's the first amendment. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Lan Farn and seconded by Councillor Vicky Southworth. And we're voting on that one. We're voting on that one. Yes, we're having voting and discussing. We're not doing the second part. So it's like there's two things up here. 7.3. Okay, right. Any questions? Questions? Megan, question.
Just a question, and I've got one for the second half, but I understand we're taking just 7.3 at this point. Just a question for staff. Some of the previous information that we had received when we were considering Miu Raku is that it was going to be 100% funded from UAGC. Is that the case, or is it going to be funded from general rate? Because how it's funded for me is a factor in the way I make this decision.
It's general rate funded.
Any other questions about? Yes, Councillor Scott.
Chair, can I just question Councillor Farm?
Yeah.
So, Councillor Farm, my question is this: what's changed in the last 21 hours when we had an agreement that the staff advice that was contained in the original thing on the?
I'm ruling that out of order. I'm sorry, Councillor Scott. If you want to challenge me, you can, but you can't. I don't think you can do that. Because I'm not letting you. I'll just take advice. Sorry, I'm waving my finger at you. It's terrible, but it's really sore. Really. My advice is I'm right. It's. I take my own advice. Apologies, Deputy, but we didn't have an agreement. That was an agreement we had a couple of days ago. That was advice sessions, and this is where we get to agree today. So I think that probably it's out of order, your question. So that's what I'm saying.
I apologise for that. I should have known that. I apologise for that. I should have known that.
Yeah, I'm supporting the retention of the current funding in this. And from the because the original question.
Hold on a minute, we just haven't. Are you speaking for it then? I was wanting to know if there were any more questions. Questions? Question? Question?
Sorry, I have another question. On this basis, are staff able to give us an indication of a rough figure of the rates? Sorry, and maybe that we can't because of the nature of it, but it is significantly more than what is in the staff option, in that it's 1 million year 1, 1.8 year 2, 2.6 all the way out to 3 million in year 10. That will no doubt have an impact in terms of total rates. Are we able to get a steer on that, or even if a back of the envelope, or we're happy to take advice in terms of whether that's.
Okay, thank you, Megan. That would be a very low impact. We'll just wait for David to get advice. So you all know, I'm trying to keep going because we're heading to lunch. So, you know, we need to stop after this one.
It would add approximately 0.5% in year 1, 0.3% in year 2, and 0.3% in year 3.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. That's very good work in the background there. Thank you very much. So any more questions? No, we're going to have speakers for and against now. I believe John was first. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak against the motion. We have some very strong staff advice as to put those reductions in place. As is indicated by staff, it would give us a 0.5% increase in rates. Staff have worked assiduously long into the night to bring our rating impost down. I believe that we should sit with that, so therefore I speak against it.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Ian Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My position is that I agree with Councillor Councillor Farm, sorry, that money spent on funding things like QE2 and Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust give direct and demonstrable benefit to the environment and to our biodiversity. My issue with the motion we're debating is that unless we can take an equivalent amount of money out of the budget from some other area that we're proposing, I can't support this motion. If in our further deliberations the money could be reduced from some of the other areas of expenditure, and I note that perhaps Enviro schools might be something that could be funded by the Ministry for the Environment, Ministry for Education, rather than from our ratepayers, then I would be happy to support Councillor Farm's proposal here. But at this stage, I'll have to vote against it.
Thank you very much. Councillor, who else is next? There's a few people. Councillor Grant Edge.
I'm supporting this this motion because it's a doable funding option. My understanding is that it was originally decided to sort of withdraw it because there was a doability issue. But if we're being a little bit more creative about taking on board some of the submissions and considering the implementation process and the creative way that could be done using partners who have the capacity to deliver, then that's a really good thing. And as a matter of principle, I think it's an important part of our transformational opportunities, and we need to grasp it.
Councillor Claire Mackay.
Thank you very much. Look, I support the concept and the brand of Me Ururako. And I also acknowledge, as Councillor Farm did, the very good work and others have done around like the likes of QE2, Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust, but also the community groups out there and the ability for us to leverage our ratepayers' dollars rather than perhaps do stuff in-house. So support all that. I also note that currently we have $250,000 in there, and we were looking to add 730,000 to bring it up to close to the $1 million that's actually in the long-term plan. To me, this reduction still results in an increase of potential activity in this portfolio in year one of the long-term plan. But like Councillor Mackenzie, it's the affordability issue here that concerns me. And for that reason, I will not be voting for this at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Clare. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Southworth and then Councillor Scott.
I'd like to support the motion. I think that the Accelerate Regeneration of Natural Environment is a transformational opportunity that came through as something very strongly in submissions, is well supported by our communities. I also like to support the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust recommendation insofar as a large amount of our general rates is raised within Christchurch. It comes from our Christchurch community who can actually benefit and see the benefits of biodiversity regeneration on the Banks Peninsula, although it's also an area that's dear to the heart of many Cantabrians, and so it has got a wider value as well. I accept there's an affordability discussion going on, but I think for the amount and given our transformational opportunity that we agreed in our strategic direction, I think that's affordability that we can afford.
Thank you. So you're speaking as the seconder. Councillor Scott.
Madam Chair, conceptually, I support Me Ururako, and I support the concept of going forward and using those agencies, I guess, to get your best bang for your dollar going out. But this has been a pretty fraught process for us in terms of our rate rise, and every percent every 0.5% is important to us. And we've deliberated today in terms of how do we get something that's acceptable to us? How do we get something that allows a continuum for this council going forward? So I think we should take on board the fact that you're a great advocate, Councillor Farm, in terms of biodiversity, and I applaud you for that. But each percentage that we can save going forward is going to be important to us.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Megan Hands.
Thanks, Chair. Like others, I want to commend Lan for putting this up for discussion. For me, 7.3 on its own and retaining that, staff have advised us there was both a doability and affordability with using the trust. We heard constantly from submitters that using the trust, and I really support us using trust rather than using our bureaucracy to do work. That really aligns with my values. That said, the affordability piece has not gone away, as others have said. And so for me, I would be happy to look at the second part of this motion that we'll consider later at a later stage within our deliberations, but don't support 7.3 as it stands up here. For me, it's not about saying no to consideration of funding these other trusts. It's about funding it in this place with this trajectory, 10-year trajectory of that significant rates rise with the affordability impact that would have there. So I'll be voting against it in this case, but for me, it doesn't mean that we can't revisit consideration of funding the trusts or other trusts later on in the day. Thanks.
Any further speakers? All right. Oh, Councillor Pauling.
Kia ora koutou. Anyone who knows me knows how much I care about this particular matter. Not just Merurako, but our wider biodiversity, biosecurity issues in Waitaha. And if you know me and you know what I do, you also know how much I know that there's never going to be enough money for biodiversity in Canterbury. We have some of the worst statistics in New Zealand when it comes to protection of our biodiversity, what we have left. I can remind you the stats if you want: 0.5% native vegetation cover on the Canterbury Plains. And so that's why, considering that, I congratulate Lan for bringing it up like others have. I acknowledge the affordability issues, but like I said, there's never going to be enough. So I do support retaining the money and getting on with work. That's where I sit.
All right. Are there any other speakers? We've had three. Under the standing orders, we have 3 for and 3 against. We don't usually apply that, but given that we don't want to be here forever, I'm thinking of doing that. But is there anybody else for it who wishes to speak? All right. Look, I think we've probably exhausted it. The mover can get another speak if she wants to. Yes, right of reply. Up to you, Councillor Farn, if you exercise.
I'm happy to just be focused on the fact that we're voting on 7.3 currently. Thank you.
Put it to the vote. All those in favour of 7.3, which is retain Merurako funding as a per option 1, which is an amendment to 7.3. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. All right, I think we'll need a show of hands. All those people for, please put your hands up. Is yours hand up? Sorry. If I need to. 7. Against. 2, 3, 4. There's Peter Scott. 4, 5. Louise. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Councillor Apanui, are you abstaining? Councillor Apanui is abstaining. So it's passed. It's passed. It's carried. So now we move on with the rest of it. So we're moving what's up on the screen as 7.3.1 as the second it's an amendment to, well, it fits in with the delivery of 7.3. It's moved by Councillor Farn, seconded by Councillor Vicky Southworth. Councillor Farn, would you like to speak again, or do you think you've spoken enough? You can speak.
Thank you, Chair. Just to draw people's attention now, considering that the expenditure has been decided on in 7.3, given that, keen to hear council's views on deliverability of that and supporting great community groups that are out there, given that the expenditure is now being decided on. Thank you.
All right, do we need any more staff advice? I think you covered it before, Cam, actually. So that's how I'm taking it. Councillor Hands.
I'd like to put an amendment to this amendment, or to the motion on the table. I'd like to amend that point B, read QE2 200,000 and Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust 100,000, please.
Just hang on a minute. So we can deal with this in a couple of ways. We could ask the mover of the resolution, do you accept those proposed amendments? So
Can I ask a question of clarification on that? Because all that means is that now the expenditure of 1 million, as has already been passed in option 1, is not adding up. So now it means that there's only 700k there. So where does the other 300k go?
we have it at committee and staff look at it, or staff to spend it. That's how it happens. Well,
as I said, we will be having a debate later in the day around another fund related to biodiversity in the contestable fund. And I'm finding it difficult that we're debating this now and not considering that piece later, and not considering them together. And my intention would be that we could have a discussion around that funding.
So I'll stop you there. So you're actually saying, if I'm right, that the 200,000 that you're reducing this by now, or is it 300,000? 300,000 actually be transferred to the contestable fund. Is that what you're thinking?
To be considered at that time.
Yeah. Okay, Lan, what do you think?
Personally, I wouldn't accept that, because then it doesn't meet the deliverability in year 1. If we just put it into another fund, it's another.
That's all we need to know from you. So now we'll just take it as an amendment to the amendment.
We vote on
the first amendment.
Yes,
and then
vote on Councillor Farn's amendment.
Yeah. But then if that rules, we'll do another one. I think we can.
Yeah, we can. Because it's taught this. So if we vote on this, it passes.
Is we're going to do it the way that council secretary prefers, which is we're going to move. Sorry, you tell them what you want to do.
Councillors, what we now need to do is vote on Councillor Farn's amendment. If it is voted, accepted, Councillor Hands can then, because we still haven't gone back to the substantive, so Councillor Hands can still move her amendment, which will look like those figures highlighted in yellow.
That's yes, a question, but you can't give you.
So my question is, and I'm not sure if this is for staff or for Councillor Farm, but the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust, as I understand at the moment, is funded by a targeted rate for those people who live in the area, and I'm not sure how big the targeted rate area is. So is the proposal for that, for if some money is voted towards the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust, will that money come from the general rate or from that targeted rate?
The CE, because I think there's a bit of.
I actually need to look to staff for an answer, to be quite honest.
That's all right, sorry, David.
So yes, the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust receives funding for us for pest-free Banks Peninsula. So it's for pest eradication purposes that comes from targeted funding. If I understand what is being proposed is, in addition to that, what's being proposed is the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust would receive additional funding for the protection of biodiversity habitats, which would be over and above pest control, if I understand that.
That's correct. The targeted rate goes towards Pest-Free Banks Peninsula, which is a joint group of 14 organisations. This is for specifically in Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust submission, their recommendation 2 requesting that council make significantly more funding available to landowners to protect Indigenous habitat through perpetual legal protection. So that's what this is specifically for, rather than the pest-free initiative, which is separate and is funded by the targeted rate.
So would you be prepared to consider a further amendment to your amendment to suggest that any money that is voted to the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust comes out of a targeted rate?
No, because we've already got the 7.3, which is retaining Mururako funding as an option 1, which is a general rate.
Okay, that's right. Excuse me, did you have a question or what? Oh, you want to speak? Okay. Right, so what we're doing at the moment then is we're going to deal with the first amendment. Yes. Councillor, people are going to speak for and against what's up on there. You can move in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I again speak against the motion. Canterbury starts just south of Blenheim and finishes on the Linders Pass just before we get into Otago. We have spent over the years considerable money and grants into Banks Peninsula. We have put significant money in an attempt to reduce the bits and pieces that were flowing. We are all aware of the actions that are happening on the peninsula, but the peninsula is just a small part of Canterbury. So I am concerned that we're effectively talking about putting $600,000 more into Banks Peninsula when it is 1 or 2% of all of Canterbury. We seem to have a very, very strong focus on that point. So I speak against this motion and consider it not the best money to be spent. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie.
Yes, I would also like to speak against this motion for similar reasons, as John has said. I do think this kind of divvying up of money is something that really should be at a committee or subcommittee level. It's not the sort of thing that we should be delving in around the council table. While I do agree that giving a large lump sum to QE2 Trust is good value for money, I do think this is something that should be delegated to our committees. That's my opinion.
Councillor McKenzie, thank you. Councillor Scott.
I too am not supportive of this because it is prescriptive. We've had representation from people from South Canterbury, which is 34% of the land area of Canterbury, about setting up a catchment collective across that area, and some really strong support from the North Canterbury group to do that. Now, I know that this is an easy way of getting a win, and I support that. This is an easy way of getting a win, but we have groups out there with really, really good intent in terms of doing great things for Canterbury across all our awa and across all our regions. And I would just think that if we're going to be prescriptive like that, maybe an amendment to say that we support these other groups too would be something we should consider at the end of this process.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Vicky Southworth.
I hear the concerns about being seen to focus in particular areas. The QE2 Trust is across Canterbury, and we have had other biodiversity spending that has focused on specific areas such as the Mackenzie Basin, such as a number of the braided rivers and so on. the Banks Peninsula area has done good things with their biodiversity. It's a real jewel for Canterbury. It's an area that is enjoyed by Cantabrians broadly. And so I think to get some quick advances on biodiversity improvements, which we really need to do, we've got an opportunity to do this in year one. And for that reason, for this 1 year only, I completely support this proposal.
Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Grant Edge.
Yeah, I'm in support of this in terms of naming this two projects. The objective really being to ensure that the spending of year one money is done as efficiently as possible, and then thereafter, and those other issues about the other submitters and other people who may want to contribute to biodiversity projects can be dealt with through the committee process. But this is a way of targeting that for a quick return within year one.
Any other speakers? All right, I'm going to put this to the vote. We're voting on the words that are on the paper up there, Lan's amendment 7.3.1, it's called up there. Everyone clear? Don't take any notice of what's in yellow, because that's not what you're voting on. That is actually an intent notice of intention from Councillor Meg Hands that she's going to move that. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say they're against. No. All right, we'd better have a show of hands. All those for, please put your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? And are you abstaining, Councillor Pauling? He's abstaining. All right, it's lost. We're back to the original debate. Do you still want to move your notice of intention to move an amendment, Councillor Hands?
No, not at the session.
All right, so can I just indicate that we will work with staff in the to work out how we're going to best deliver this money as we move through into the first committee meetings. Is that all right? Okay, we'll have that up very early on the agenda for discussion. So thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair. Now that the
Got to revert
amendment
to this.
has passed, we need to vote on the substantive motion.
Yes, yeah. We're going back to the substantive motion now. Yes, what's your?
Could I propose an amendment to the amendment? So 7.31 and take out the reference to the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust. And so
No, just hang on.
Sorry,
We've got some
sorry.
technical advice here.
Just to any confusion.
You can amend the substantive motion, but not this.
This probably sounds pedantic, but the amendment has the 7.3 was successful. 7.3 was the first one was successful. 7.3
failed.
The second one failed. So retain the funding as per option 1 is now the substantive motion. Councillor Ian McKenzie can propose, any councillor can propose an amendment to the substantive motion, which is retain the funding as per option 1.
And that's how I was proceeding. So do you want to amend it?
So my proposal would be to use Councillor Farm's words, but exclude the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust. No, leave that in. And if I can just explain the rationale, the rationale for voting in favour of 7.3 was that they wanted the rationale for voting in favour of that was that if we included QE2 and possibly the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust, there was immediate opportunity to get there was immediate doability of being able to use that money. If we leave 7.3 in its raw state, our advice from staff is actually Raka may not have the doability for being able to use that money in the first year. So it seems to me that the sticking point to Councillor Farm's amendment, proposed last amendment, was the reflection on putting money into Banks Peninsula as opposed to the wider region. supporting QE2, which covers the whole of the Canterbury region, seems to me to include the intent of some of what Councillor Farm was proposing and the supporters of 7.3 were talking about, without restricting ourselves to only one small part of the region. So I would propose that amendment. I would move.
Yes, you're moving an amendment. Have we got a seconder for Councillor Ian McKenzie, seconded by Councillor Nicole Marshall? Anybody wish to speak for or against, or Councillor Peter Scott?
Look, Madam Chair, I must say that I'm against this also because it's prescriptive in terms of across the region. I know that QE2 is across the region, but there are people out there who are trying to get on board this biodiversity vehicle that we're running here, and they can't. And I'm worried about that.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Grant, Edge.
I'm against this amendment because item 7.3 was about ensuring the funding on year 1, 2 and 3 for the Miraraki project.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that that's correct because we've already got a substantive motion that returns the funding to option 1, and we're not changing that. So that doesn't mean to say that. Anyway, Councillor Lanfarm.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this amendment. Just in clarification for Grant, this is about the expenditure of where we've already landed with 7.3 and where that goes. My question of clarification, if I'm allowed, Chair, is again just to Ian, and I totally agree with the intent there and the distribution across the board. It's just now my question is, there's 1 million in 7.3, and so again we're resting at 800k here. What do you suggest there?
So in my right of reply, I was going to point out that actually, yes, you're right, Councillor Farm, that there's $1 million now in year 1 for Miraraka. If you use 400,000 to fund QE2, that still leaves $600,000 for the Miraraka project, which also may provide opportunity for Councillor Hands later in the meeting to discuss perhaps those other options. And it also includes a fund there for the concerns that Councillor Scott is referring to.
Move it to the contestable fund, or we could leave it for staff to manage.
I'm very happy to second that. Thank you.
No, we've already gone to second.
Oh, sorry.
David, do you want to make one? That'd be great.
I missed that.
Just a point of clarity for the screen. So with regard to the program development funding, that would be 600,000 from your suggestion, i.e. the $1 million total, 400 QE2 National Trust.
All I'm saying is, of the $1 million voted to Miraraka, 400 of that for 1 year may be directed towards QE2.
I want to thank Ian for this. I think I definitely support this. I can see that QE2 is definitely a worthy recipient of this. And because they do stretch across the region, it's easier to support that. So I definitely support this motion.
Do we want any more speakers? Councillor Hands.
Just a brief comment from me on this. I mean, I'll support 2. The reason that I will is that the council has already made that decision on 7.3. I do not want this council to have accusations of failure to deliver levelled at us, and so for that reason I'd like to support it.
Thank you. I don't think I heard that. Anyway, so is anybody else wanting to speak, or shall we vote? Let's vote.
If we just clarify, sorry, councillors, being pedantic, just clarifying that it's what's on the screen.
Yes.
So it's not A.
No.
And it's not C. It's just B. Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, the button wasn't on.
All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say they're against it. They're not against it. They are. Okay, it's carried. It's, oh, is that the end of that? No, we've got to keep going. We're going to the end of this. So I'm up to 7.4. Oh, yes.
Tēnā tātou, ko tai te waka wehio. I'm sorry, I have to give leave of the council meeting. I'm off to down south to Wanaka for a symposium that I'll be have to speak at. So, reira, kia kaha koutou.
I'll drive very careful, okay? Thank you. 7.4, decrease year 1, 2 and 3 of the general rating funding for priority habitat wetland protection by $300,000. Who's going to move that? Moved by Councillor Peter Scott, seconded by Councillor Ian McKenzie. Are there any questions? All right, is there anybody wanting to speak? All right, all those in favour, please say aye. Anybody against? That's carried. Thank you. 7.5, excuse me, maintain total funding for the Regional Pest Management Program while reducing 300,000 of the 50/50 general target rate funding by utilising reserves. Who would like to move that? Moved by Councillor John Sunkel, seconded by Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie. Are there any questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody against? There being nobody against, it's carried. Is there anything else to do on this particular biodiversity and biosecurity area? Anybody saying anything about the levels of service? Did we do the substantive matter on 7.3? I thought we did, but right. 7.3, the substantive motion.
It's procedural that we vote on.
I thought we did it. So it's retain Miyuraku funding as per option 1. That's moved by Councillor Lan Farn, seconded by Councillor Craig Pauling. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say so. There being none, that's carried. Okay, that's just so we've got it on the record that apparently we didn't do that. So great that somebody picked it up. We're now adjourning for lunch at 1:45. We'll be back here by 15 minutes past 1. Thank you very much.